Hi, it's me, Dr. Joyce Alberts, clinical psychologist working in private practice in North Canterbury. If you've noticed on my YouTube channel, I have been posting a series of videos where I've been talking about the concerns for the harm that has been caused by a group claiming to be a Christian community called Gloriavale Christian Community. They're based on the west coast of the South Island of New Zealand, but they originated in North Canterbury, formed by Neville Cooper, who was an Australian who came to New Zealand with specific purpose of starting his own church. So this would be series video 5. So I've already uploaded 3. Video 4 is uploading as I speak now. And I mentioned in one of the videos another group in North Canterbury, Waipara. I touched on those. I referred to them. They were known as Camp David. That was their location. So I went back and just double checked my own facts and refreshed my own memory because I was speaking from memory. They were known in the community as the God Squad. They were led by one leader who established this group. They have kind of disbanded, but not quite. There are still people living on the property, and there's been lots of um, conflict over splitting up the property, who gets the assets. And it was even suggested at one time that there were other religious groups, one in Hokitika and one in Nelson, that were hoping to take over the property and then reap the benefit of the hard work of those who established this property. It's a rather large property, and from my personal memory, it was surrounded, fenced with a high concrete block fence that was painted white, and it had sort of it stylized almost like a castle on top. So I sort of remembered bits and pieces of different parts of what this group were like. And again, in many ways, similar to the Cooperites as they're now known when they were here in North Canterbury, but more recently known as the Gloriavale Christian Community. There were similarities, but there were also distinct differences. And you may recall that I mentioned in one of the videos that on the documentary Devotion, the Gloriavale Story, one of the current leaders mentioned the raids that the police conducted on the Springbank or Cust property. This was related to allegations of specific child harm, child SA, and similar uh, aimed against Neville Cooper. And this leader said it was an overreaction, that the police treated them like it was Waco, Texas. You might remember, I think they were called the Camp Davidians. So again, a cult, a group, spouting religious teachings, one man holding power over the entire group. And there was a raid and a siege that did lots of shooting, and tragically, the members of that group set the buildings on fire, killing themselves and many of the children. And I disagreed with that comparison because um, that just didn't make sense, especially knowing that there was another group in North Canterbury where the police had conducted raids due to the large amount of illegal firearms this group and ammunition this group were amassing. So I did say that I would fact check myself. So I'm just going to bring that over here. Make sure I've got the right information up on my screen before I share. Now, this actually is a New Zealand government site that I'm going to show you. Um, I'm just going to show you it briefly so that you yourself can confirm that the information I'm talking about is coming from a reliable source. So you can see up here where I'm pointing with my cursor, it says terra.govt.nz. So that's the format for websites that are official government New Zealand websites. So I'm just going to touch on that briefly. It does say not to publish or reproduce this information, so I'm going to stop sharing. But I just want you to be able to confirm that the information I am talking about comes from a reliable source. So in this particular article, which is on Te Ara, the Encyclopedia of New Zealand, and so I had done a Google search related to the God Squad and Camp David and Waipara. And you may recall that I was talking about when I personally met Neville Cooper, and I recollected that around this time there had been a police raid to the God Squad to Camp David in Waipara. So this New Zealand encyclopedia article says the sect was based at a Waipara commune called Camp David, which flourished from the 1970s until the late 1990s. In 1997, the camp was raided by police. Sorry, 1977 and 1987. So two raids, not the one. I only recalled the one in the late 80s. So I'm quite reassured that my memory was sufficiently accurate. So the police learned that this group were stockpiling arms. Similar process to Glorville Christian community when if members chose to leave or if they criticised the leader who was Douglas Metcalf, since passed away, they would be expelled and then shunned by those who remained inside the group. So they followed the teachings and rulings of Douglas Metcalf, who portrayed himself as the Messiah, as God. I've read other stories, news articles, etc. I've got one. This one was originally, I'll share this one with you. This one was originally printed in the Christchurch Press. It's one of our major news outlets here in Christchurch, and it also has a website called Stuff. And this article, as I see it, it was published 2002. So it's published on the 3rd of August 2002. And it refers to, if you wanted to look this up, it's called Religion News Blog, The Crumbling of Camp David. And it refers to how this person who led this group would be heralded by his members dressed in what could only be described as religious robes, who were heralded him with horns blowing onto ram's horns. He dressed in religious outfits. There were huge religious icons all around the property. And similar to the Cooperites at the time too, women were in a very submissive role, covering their heads with headscarves, long hair. They weren't allowed to cut their hair or do anything else to the hair, and that was a sign of submission. And wearing similar clothing, so the small pastels, prints. But in the case of the God Squad and people who lived at Camp David, the women also wore more brighter colours, and there they were allowed to have frills or decorative items on their clothing because apparently, according to one of the women at the time, this leader, Metcalf, wanted to look out on a sea of flowers. So beauty and aesthetics were important to him. So nothing to do with religious teachings or script, things based in fact. It was related directly to what one man wanted. So again, very similar to Glorville Christian community and how that was established by one man who wanted to be able to have, remember Judge Noble said, power and dominion over vulnerable people. This is what these men were wanted. So, as the news item said, 1977, the first police raid where they confiscated a lot of weapons, and then another raid, a further raid 10 years later, where they'd managed to amass even more. I've seen various postings when I looked into this where they were purchasing on Trade Me, Trade Me being a platform where you can advertise goods for sale, services for sale, even property for sale, cars, etc. And I was a little bit skeptical about that, but then I do recall an incident where, when I was working in the hospital, a patient that I had to go see had purchased a weapon through Trade Me and had it delivered to the hospital, which resulted in an armed defenders call out. So I did see the armed defenders leaving the hospital ward as I walked on the ward, because the person I was going to see had told the nurse that the package that was delivered was a weapon. So it seems, based on what I was told, and then what I've seen posted, that may be possible that people were purchasing weapons and ammunition on Trade Me. So this group, and what I recall of this group too, they had these vehicles, they had vans, like combi vans, and they were white and they had a red cross on them, and they would travel up and down the state highway. So if you think between Waipara, is like a major intersection, it's a major area, because you can either go towards Hamner Springs and land towards the Alps that run across along the length of the South Island, and we have mountain passes, particularly one, the Lewis Pass, and that would even take you over to the west coast, up to Nelson, and then you could travel along the coast. Once you go through Waipara, you go carry along up the coast, and you will head towards Kaikoura, Blenheim, Picton, and also across to Nelson. So it's a major travel route, and a lot of tourists, young people hitchhiking, families traveling would be going through that area. It's the main route if you're traveling from the north of the South Island towards Christchurch or south, unless, of course, you went along the west coast. So if you weren't going along the west coast, even if you came through the mountain pass or you took the coastal route, you were going to come through Waipara. So strategic location. So they'd go out in these vans, often trying to recruit tourists, hitchhikers, but also providing mechanical assistance if people broke down. So they were seen as being helpful in that way. So that's one of my recollections. And again, if I'm wrong and if I'm confusing my groups, happy to be corrected. But from memory, it was the God Squad people who had the white vans with the red cross, and painted in a very similar way, that if you know of the international organisation, the Red Cross, the way their vehicles would be painted, but they weren't the official Red Cross, they were the God Squad. So one of these articles refers to a group of, or a couple of women who had gone back into the compound, into Camp David, many years after they had left, because my understanding is, still today there's a small number, maybe only one or two or three, but a very small number of people who are still living there. It's described as very overgrown, the gardens, the buildings, there's motor vehicles, some of these vans still there, which have just been left abandoned, just rusting and decaying. So a couple of women had gone, I read, had gone back into Camp David and wanted to see the place for themselves, because they had left when they were quite young. And they had memories of being harmed, specifically harmed through SA, not just from the one leader, but through other males within the group. And they uncovered hidden passageways that would allow access directly into the private rooms, or sleeping quarters where families or young adults, young people would be. And when I read that, it reminded me, and I went, oh, yes, that's right. So many years ago, when I worked in neuropsychology and I was working in the hospital, I had a relatively young client come in. He would have been 18, I think he was at the time. So still, just a young adult. And he'd experienced an accident which resulted in a traumatic brain injury. But part of my work was also to assess his psychological functioning, and he was very distressed, had presented with a lot of symptoms of PTSD. And as I talked him through the process, it disclosed that he had been born and raised until he was 15, living within the Camp David, so a member of the God Squad. His story was that he grew up with essay of children being normalized. Uh, as a child, as a young person, that's all he knew. It was happening to him. It was happening to all of them. This is his description. Obviously, I'm recalling it from my interview with him. He described how he was taken out of the group when an aunt and uncle of his, I think it was his paternal uncle, had left the group, but he had still had contact with his cousins who were now outside of the group. And he described engaging in the same behavior that he had been exposed to, thinking this was normal, this is what you did, and this is how you showed how to show affection, which he had affection for his younger cousins. And he was prosecuted for that. He said quite rightly, he recognised uh, once he was out of the group and once he met with other people, he developed insight that this was not normal. This was specifically harmful. And what stood out after I read the account of the two women is he said the same thing. He said there were secret passageways that allowed the men to move between the sleeping quarters of various families, that this is how the men and adult males would have access to children and young people. It was described to me that the sec, sorry, the SA was well known. It was understood that this was occurring, while often it was done in hidden, manipulative ways. It wasn't always, and that the group were aware that their leader was far from being faithful to his own marriage, in his own marriage, and to his own wife, and that was well known. So again, when I think about that comment, that the police raid on the Christian community in Springbank at the time, the Cooperites, that was an overreaction. And I'm thinking, no, it wasn't. The police had already been involved in two raids with this group, and came across a large illegal amassment of weapons. And so wouldn't it have been foolish for them not to have taken seriously the concerns and allegations that were coming out of the Springbank group? Police didn't know that, I don't know what intelligence they had. But the other thing is, I'm thinking about it. If you watch the documentary, I didn't see any armed police, like the SOS guys going. They have the helmets and the dark glasses, and they obviously got their vests on, their bulletproof vests, and they're carrying the long weapons. I don't recall seeing that. I did recall seeing police, obviously, and detectives walking on site. The person said that they came with buses or vans because they were expecting that this raid would result in people wanting to leave, and they'd have to be able to transport large numbers of families with children off site, which obviously didn't happen. Um, I don't know. I don't know why the police, and if they did, I don't know. Maybe they were expecting that they might have had to remove a large number of children or families. And at this time when these raids were happening and these concerns were coming out, yes, there were groups internationally that different law authorities or of police officers, etc., had to go in and remove children and families because of the risk of harm. So I just really, I'm still scratching my head as to, I know justification, self-justification, but the lack of insight that this was not an overreaction. Multiple people had come out of this group and multiple victims came forward and alleged that they had been harmed specifically under SA from Neville Cooper. And that resulted in a successful conviction. The jury found him guilty and he did serve time in prison. So I ask again, was it an overreaction? My opinion, no. So that was a comparison. I don't know what it is with North Canterbury. Why it was that we had two of these groups around the same time, very similar. So there may be some of those socio dynamics around, having been post-war and the 50s and 60s, and maybe that's something to do with the geography, the location, maybe convenient because it's close to a large city, which is Christchurch, as I said, strategic for the God's God people as they easily access State Highway 1, which runs the length not just of the South Island, but the length of New Zealand. You can travel from the top of New Zealand to the bottom of New Zealand following State Highway 1. So I'm not sure why North Canterbury experienced that. But I do know what I do know. Groups like this, the Gloriavale Christian Community, God Squad, they cause harm. I've been describing this as a closed system in the sense that there is strict control around information going in and out of this group, that there is a, an intent to prevent outsiders, outside authority looking in to see what's going on. So there's no, the flow of information being, if you like, fact checked, someone calling you up and saying, hey, do you really think you should be doing it that way? No, no, that's not okay. That's not appropriate. In fact, that's actually illegal. So they close the system, which also means people inside the system don't have access to information outside of what they've been told by their leader. So again, just another example of this and how this causes harm. There was quite a famous psychology experiment back in the day. It was similar time to all of this going on, to be honest. It was called the Stanford experiment. You can YouTube this. There is an actual documentary around this, but there's also a movie that was made to sort of portray what happened. So in a nutshell, one person, a man, sorry guys, but yep, a male. He was a psychology PhD student and he had permission, he had consent to, ethics consent to undertake this experiment. It was a psychology experiment and he set up in the basement of the Stanford University Psychology Department, essentially a prison. Where it became a closed system was that he was the researcher, but he also he appointed himself to be the warden, so having oversight and direction over what happened. People were recruited, many of them were students from the university, but they were recruited to be participants. They're randomly assigned to either be the prison officers or the inmates. And one of the main things about this experiment was to see how people would respond, how psychologically they respond. And horrifically, within a very short time, I'm talking like maybe hours, minutes, maybe instantly, one or two had decided exactly how they were going to um, participate in this experiment based on their assignment. So the prison officers, because of this person's decision to be very punitive, um, started to become very punitive towards all of the inmates. Remember that it's not real, it's an experiment. One of the inmates had decided that he was going to participate in this experiment by being as I don't know, rebellious, difficult, non-compliant as possible. So whatever the prison officers were going to tell him to do, he was going to do the opposite. And very quickly, a number of other inmates followed suit. And because it was a closed system and this experiment was running, and it was running for a number of days, like it wasn't just let's run the experiment for 2 or 3 hours. Okay, guys, you go home. Let's come back tomorrow and we'll repeat. No, they actually were staying there. They literally were being locked into these so-called prison cells, and the prison officers walking around as if it was a prison. And I do remember on the documentary, one or two of the inmates really started to react as if they literally were in prison and they were inmates and they would not be released, that they were being held prisoner, even though it was a psychology experiment that they had volunteered for. So see the power and the control, and how we must be concerned about these closed systems, because how the psychology of this really can cause damage. So the warden, who's the PhD student who's the running the experiment, really loses sight of what his true role would be, lose sight of what's safe, what's ethical, and allows all of this to continue. And it didn't stop until he invited a friend to come down into the basement to see this experiment. Because he was like, this is great. This is fantastic data that I'm collecting. And look at what's happening. And it really looks like a real prison. They're acting like prison officers and inmates. So he was showing this person around who just looked at him horrified and said, this is not okay. And as he heard this, his, colleague, a friend's response and shock and horror to what they were seeing, which he was thinking was great, and he looks at this person and they go, no, this is not okay. You can't do this. He realizes and sort of shakes him out of it. And yeah, the experiment got shut down. But if you do watch that documentary again, you will hear the harm that did cause people. And it wasn't just a matter of, okay, this experiment stopped, um, go home now, all good. Sorry. But yeah, you're okay. No, it really did. And in a short time, cause harm. So think about the harm of these closed systems. And in particular, I'm talking about Gloriavale. And I call it a closed system, is that only allowing what the leadership allows to come in or out. There's a strict control on that. I spoke to someone recently about the cell phones or access to the internet. When I say spoke to someone recently, I'm talking within the last few days. Someone who left this community as a young adult and said, yeah, they can recall their father had a position of authority, a leadership role, and said, yeah, he had a laptop. And this person, prior to leaving, had gone onto that laptop, had set up a Facebook account, and was beginning to make contact with people who'd already left in plans of their own, want a better word, escape from Gloryville. The father discovered this and said that he was going to have to tell the leadership, because you're not allowed to lie. You're not allowed to tell a lie in Gloryville to the leadership. You can lie to everyone else. You can lie to the police and the rangatamariki, the care and protection social workers, but you can't lie to the leadership. And he said he was going to have to tell them. He said, because they will know they are monitoring this and they will think it was him. So yes, he dobbed his daughter in, went to the leadership, and she's told to leave. That was it. She was expelled, excluded. Um, this person said they left. Remember, they took some items of clothing and their pillow or pillowcase. That's all they can remember. And even the leaving, the details of that, the recollection of it was very traumatic. And their recollection was patchy in the way that a trauma memory is patchy, because the emotional response and the overwhelming emotions that come up because of the trauma in the moment can impact on the laying down of that memory trace in a cohesive way, or a way that flows so that you can recall all the sequence of events that occurred. So my point here, by reverting back to and just talking about the God Squad and Camp David and the Stanford experiment, is to compare that to what we know has and continues to happen within the Glorivale Christian community as a result of the leadership, the men who appoint themselves to be an authority over women and children in this community, and the harm that this caused. Now, if the Stanford experiment could cause harm in a matter of hours, minutes, days, think about what it's like when we're what, third, fourth generation, maybe even fifth generation now, of people born and raised knowing nothing else but life in Glorivale. We'll leave it there. Ka kite. Talk again soon.